After falling off a cliff, the rancher was taken by a mysterious tribe into the forest and saved. Every morning before sunrise, he woke to the sound of wind brushing across dry grass and the low calls of cattle waiting to be moved. The highlands were not an easy place to work, but they were familiar to him. He knew the slopes, the narrow paths, and the way the weather could change without warning. Still, even a man who respected nature could never fully control it. That day began like many others. The sky was pale, with thin clouds stretched across it like worn fabric. The rancher saddled his horse and checked his gear carefully. He planned to guide a small group of cattle across higher ground to reach better grazing areas. The route was difficult, but it saved time and water. He had used it before, though not recently. As he rode out, the land felt unusually quiet. Birds were scarce, and the wind carried a cold edge that did not belong to the season. As the sun climbed higher, the path grew narrower. On one side, the land rose sharply, covered in rough stone and thin trees. On the other, the ground dropped away into a deep, shadowed valley. The rancher kept his focus on the cattle, guiding them slowly, making sure none strayed too close to the edge. His horse moved carefully, trained by years of work in dangerous terrain. For a while, everything went smoothly. Then the weather changed. The wind picked up suddenly, pushing hard against the rancher's back. Dark clouds gathered faster than expected, rolling in from behind the mountains. A low sound echoed through the valley, warning of rain. The rancher tightened his grip on the reins and urged the cattle to move faster. He knew that rain could turn solid ground into loose, dangerous soil within minutes. The first drops fell lightly, almost harmless. But soon the rain grew heavier, striking the ground with force. The path became slick and stones loosened underfoot. The rancher tried to guide the cattle away from the narrowest section, but the animals sensed danger and grew restless. One cow slipped, causing others to panic and shift suddenly. The horse reacted before the rancher could. Its back legs lost traction on the wet ground, and it stumbled sideways. The rancher leaned forward, trying to steady himself, but the movement threw off his balance. Time seemed to slow as he felt the horse slide toward the edge. He heard the sharp crack of stone breaking loose and felt the ground give way beneath him. Then there was nothing solid left to hold. The rancher was thrown from the saddle, his body rolling down the slope. He struck rocks and dirt as he fell, each impact knocking the air from his lungs. The rain blurred his vision, and the sound of the storm mixed with the pounding of his heartbeat. He tried to grab onto something, anything, but the slope was too steep and too loose. At last, everything went dark. When the storm passed, the highlands looked empty again. The cattle had scattered, and the horse stood injured but alive a short distance away. The path showed signs of disturbance, broken stones and marks in the wet soil, but the rancher was nowhere to be seen. Below the cliff, the valley swallowed all signs of what had happened. By nightfall, the rain stopped and silence returned. When the rancher did not return by the next morning, concern spread quickly. He was a man who never missed a routine. Neighbors rode out to search for him, following the usual routes he took. They found the horse first, limping but calm, standing near the damaged path. The broken saddle strap and scattered gear told a clear story. Someone had fallen. Search teams were organized, and the valley below the cliff was examined as carefully as possible. But the terrain was harsh. Thick forest covered much of the ground, and steep drops made it dangerous to climb down. Fog rolled in during the evenings, hiding everything beyond a few steps. After several days of searching, no sign of the rancher was found. Some believed he had not survived the fall. Others refused to accept it so easily. Stories began to circulate among the locals. Some spoke of hidden parts of the forest where maps failed and paths disappeared. Old hunters mentioned areas they avoided, places where compasses acted strangely and sounds carried in odd ways. These stories were usually dismissed as superstition, but now they were spoken with quiet seriousness. The rancher, meanwhile, lay unconscious far from where anyone searched. Deep in the forest, where tall trees blocked most of the light and the air smelled of earth and leaves, his body rested on soft ground. His breathing was shallow and his injuries were serious, but he was still alive. Hours after the storm ended, figures moved silently through the trees. They were careful, alert, and clearly familiar with the land. They found him broken but breathing. Instead of leaving him, they worked together with calm efficiency. They examined his injuries, lifted him with care, and carried him away from the open slope. No words were spoken, but their actions were precise and practiced. The forest closed behind them as they disappeared, leaving no clear trail. By the time search teams gave up and returned home, the rancher was already far from the cliff, moving deeper into a world no one suspected existed. And while the land above mourned a man believed lost, the forest below had quietly claimed him, setting the stage for a survival story no one would believe if he ever told it. Darkness slowly faded, but the rancher did not wake all at once. His mind moved in and out of awareness like drifting on water. At first he felt only pain. A deep, heavy pain spread through his body, making it hard to breathe. Every small movement sent a sharp message through his bones. He tried to open his eyes, but they felt too heavy, as if they no longer belonged to him. Sounds reached him before sight, soft crackling like wood burning. A low, steady rhythm, almost like breathing but not his own. Somewhere nearby, something rustled gently. He tried to move his hands, but they would not respond. Panic rose inside him, but his body was too weak to react. When his eyes finally opened, light filtered through layers of green. Leaves, tall shapes above him blocked most of the sky. He was not in the open valley or near the cliff. He was surrounded by forest. The air felt cooler and damp, carrying the smell of soil, plants, and smoke. His head throbbed as he tried to focus. He realized he was lying on something soft, not dirt. It felt like dried grass and woven leaves. He turned his head slightly and saw a simple shelter above him, built from branches and covered with thick foliage. It was carefully made, strong enough to keep out rain. This was not a place formed by accident. Fear slowly replaced confusion. He tried to sit up, but pain stopped him immediately. His leg felt heavy and stiff. When he looked down, he saw it was tightly wrapped with strips of cloth and plant fibers. His arm was also bound, held straight by wooden supports. Dried paste covered parts of his skin, dark and cracked. The smell was sharp but not unpleasant. Someone had treated his injuries. As this thought settled in his mind, movement caught his attention. A figure stepped into view from the side of the shelter. The person was unlike anyone the rancher had seen before. Their clothing was simple, made from natural materials. Their skin and hair blended with the colors of the forest. Their eyes studied him carefully, not with fear but with focus. The rancher tried to speak. His throat felt dry and only a weak sound came out. The figure did not react with surprise. Instead, they raised a hand slowly, a calm gesture meant to quiet him. Then they turned away and made a soft sound like a call. More figures appeared. They came quietly, stepping lightly on the forest floor. Men and women of different ages stood nearby, watching him with curiosity and caution. None carried modern tools. What they held were items made of wood, stone, and woven fibers. Their movements were controlled and purposeful. The rancher's heart raced. He did not understand who they were or where he was. His mind searched for explanations. Had he been found by hikers? But no one dressed like this. Were they from a remote village? He had heard stories but never believed them. One of the older members stepped forward. Their hair was streaked with gray, their face marked by years of living outdoors. They knelt beside him and examined his injuries closely. They pressed gently near his leg, watching his reaction. Pain flared and the rancher gasped. The elder nodded as if confirming something. They spoke to the others in a language the rancher did not recognize. The sounds were soft but complex, filled with rhythm. He could not understand the words, but the tone was calm. There was no anger or threat in it. The elder took a small bowl from someone nearby. Inside was a dark liquid. They lifted the rancher's head carefully and guided the bowl to his lips. He hesitated. Every instinct warned him to refuse, but his throat burned with thirst and he was too weak to resist. He took a small sip. The taste was bitter, earthy, but not harmful. Warmth spread through his chest as he swallowed. After a few sips, the elder pulled the bowl away. The rancher felt slightly clearer, though still weak. His breathing slowed. The figures stepped back, giving him space. One remained nearby, seated quietly, watching him. The rancher realized then that he was not a prisoner. He was being guarded but not restrained. His injuries were the only thing keeping him in place. Hours passed, or maybe longer. Time felt strange in the forest. Light shifted through the leaves and shadows moved slowly across the shelter. The rancher drifted in and out of sleep. Each time he woke, someone was there. Sometimes they changed the paste on his wounds. Sometimes they offered him water or a soft mash made from plants. No one spoke to him directly, but their actions showed care. He began to notice details. The shelter was part of a larger hidden area. Through small gaps, he saw other structures, all built in similar ways, blending into the forest. Smoke rose in thin lines, carefully controlled. Everything was placed to avoid drawing attention. These people did not want to be found. At night, the forest came alive with sounds. Insects, distant calls, the movement of animals. The tribe moved confidently, unbothered by the darkness. Fires were kept low. The rancher lay awake, listening, wondering if anyone was still searching for him. He thought of the cliff, of the fall, of how easily his life could have ended there. Days passed, measured by the return of light and darkness. His pain slowly lessened. He could move his fingers and toes. The swelling in his leg reduced. The people continued their careful treatment. They used crushed leaves, heated stones, and gentle pressure. Everything was done with knowledge passed down over time. One morning, the elder returned and sat beside him again. They placed a hand on their chest, then gestured toward the rancher. It was a simple movement, but he understood the meaning. They were acknowledging him, recognizing him as a person, not just a body found in the forest. The rancher nodded slowly. Trust began to form, thin but real. He tried to communicate in simple ways, pointing, small gestures. The tribe responded in kind. They showed him water sources, food plants, and animals carved into wood, perhaps symbols of their beliefs. He realized they lived closely with the forest, taking only what was needed. Though he still felt fear, it was no longer sharp. These people had saved his life. They had carried him deep into the forest, treated wounds they did not cause, and protected him from dangers he could not face alone. Yet mystery surrounded them. They never ventured near the open land. They avoided certain areas entirely. When distant sounds echoed, they grew alert and shifted positions quietly. The rancher sensed that staying hidden was essential to their survival. As his strength slowly returned, so did his awareness of how far he was from everything he knew. His ranch, his neighbors, the open sky, all felt like another lifetime. Here, under layers of green and shadow, he existed in a fragile balance between two worlds. And while his body healed, his understanding changed. He had fallen from a cliff and disappeared from his world. But instead of ending, his life had crossed into a place untouched by modern time. A place where survival depended not on machines or roads, but on trust, patience, and deep respect for the land. Unseen, undocumented, and silent, the forest people had taken him in. And for now, they were the only reason he was still alive. As the days passed, the rancher's body slowly grew stronger, but his mind was changing even faster. Each morning, he woke to the soft sounds of the forest instead of the wind across open land. Light reached him gently through the leaves, never harsh, never direct. The people of the forest moved around him with quiet purpose, beginning their day before the sun fully rose. Nothing was rushed, yet everything was done with care. When he was finally able to sit up on his own, the tribe helped him carefully. They supported his back and adjusted the bindings on his leg. Pain was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. He could feel progress, small but steady. That gave him hope. He began to notice how the tribe lived. They did not speak loudly or argue. Their communication was calm, often done through gestures and short phrases. Everyone seemed to know their role. Some gathered food, others prepared meals, and some watched the edges of their hidden space. Children learned by observing, following adults closely, copying movements and habits. Food was simple but nourishing. The rancher was given soft meals at first, made from roots, fruits, and grains he had never seen before. The taste was different from anything he knew, but it gave him strength. As his body adjusted, he was able to eat more solid food. He noticed that nothing was wasted. Every part of what they gathered had a purpose. One afternoon, when he was strong enough to stand with support, two members of the tribe helped him walk a short distance. His leg trembled and sweat formed on his face, but they did not rush him. They waited patiently, allowing him to move at his own pace. When he grew tired, they guided him back to rest. This simple kindness stayed with him. As his awareness grew, so did his curiosity. He watched how they treated injuries using plants and careful techniques. He saw them heat stones to ease pain and use clean water in ways that showed deep understanding. Their knowledge was not written or recorded, but passed through practice and memory. The rancher realized something important. These people were not primitive or unaware. They were skilled in a different way. Their intelligence was shaped by survival, observation, and respect for the forest. They lived without modern tools, yet their lives were balanced and organized. Slowly, they began to trust him more. They no longer watched him every moment. Children came closer, curious about his clothing and boots. One child touched the fabric of his jacket, surprised by its texture. The rancher smiled gently and allowed it. This small moment broke a barrier he did not know existed. He tried to help where he could. At first, it was only small tasks: holding items, passing water, sitting nearby while others worked. Even these simple actions made him feel useful again. He was no longer just someone being cared for. He was becoming part of their daily rhythm. One day, an older member showed him how they set simple traps for small animals, designed to avoid harm when possible. The rancher recognized the care taken in every step. This was not about control or dominance. It was about balance. As weeks passed, he learned to move more freely. His legs still needed support, but he could walk short distances on his own. He began spending time outside the shelter, sitting among the trees, listening to the forest. He noticed how different it felt from the open land he once knew. The forest was alive in layers, always moving, always breathing. At night, they sometimes gathered around a low fire. The flames were small, controlled, never allowed to grow high. Shadows danced across faces as stories were shared in their language. The rancher could not understand the words, but he felt the meaning. The stories were about the forest, the seasons, and the lessons learned from both. Occasionally, they would look at him during these moments. Not as an outsider, but as someone included, even if only for a short time. Still, there were limits. He noticed that certain areas were never entered. When he pointed or looked too long in one direction, someone would gently guide his attention away. The tribe remained alert, especially when unfamiliar sounds echoed in the distance. Their survival depended on remaining unseen. The rancher began to understand that his presence was a risk. One evening, the elder sat beside him again. They traced symbols in the dirt, simple shapes that seemed to represent paths, trees, and boundaries. Then they drew a figure apart from the others. The meaning was clear. The rancher could stay for now, but not forever. This realization brought mixed feelings. Part of him longed for his old life, the open skies, his ranch, the familiar routines, but another part of him felt a deep respect and connection to this hidden world. These people had saved him without expecting anything in return. They had shared their knowledge and space, even though it went against their nature to do so. As his strength improved, the tribe began preparing him in subtle ways. They showed him edible plants he might need to recognize. They pointed out signs of water and safe paths. They guided his attention toward the direction that led away from their home. He understood what was coming. Despite the unspoken sadness, there was no anger. The forest had rules and they lived by them. He was grateful for every moment he had been given. On his last evening among them, they shared a meal together. Nothing special, just food and quiet presence. The elder placed a hand on the rancher's shoulder, a simple gesture filled with meaning. It was not a goodbye, but an acknowledgement of what had been shared. The rancher slept deeply that night. When he woke, the forest felt different, calm but expectant. He knew that soon he would have to leave the safety of this hidden place and return to a world that believed he was gone forever, but he would not leave unchanged. He had fallen from a cliff and lost everything he knew. In return, he had gained something rare, an understanding that life could exist beyond maps and records, guided by respect rather than control. As he prepared for the next step of his journey, one truth stayed with him. He had survived not because of strength alone, but because strangers chose compassion in silence. And that knowledge would follow him long after the forest released him back into the world. The morning felt different from all the others. The forest was quiet in a deeper way, as if it knew something was about to change. The rancher woke before anyone came to check on him. For the first time since the accident, he sat up without help. His leg still hurt, but it could carry his weight. The pain no longer controlled him. He looked around the shelter that had protected him for so long. The woven leaves above, the smooth ground beneath, the familiar smell of herbs and smoke. This place had become a second home, even though he had never known it existed before his fall. Now he felt the weight of knowing he would soon leave it behind. The elder arrived quietly, followed by two others. No words were spoken. The elder nodded once slowly. The rancher understood. Today was the day. They helped him stand and guided him outside. The air was cool and light filtered softly through the trees. Members of the tribe were already awake, moving calmly, but their attention often turned toward him. There was no sadness on their faces, only seriousness and care. They had prepared for this moment just as carefully as they had prepared his healing. He was given simple items, a small bundle of dried food wrapped in leaves, a container made from natural material filled with clean water, a walking stick, smooth and strong, shaped to fit his hand. The elder showed him how to use it to test the ground ahead, especially on uneven paths. Then came the herbs. One of the women applied a final layer of healing paste to his leg and shoulder. She pressed gently, then stepped back. The elder gestured for him to move his leg. He did, slowly, carefully. It held. A quiet sense of relief moved through the group. The rancher wanted to speak. He wanted to thank them, to explain what their help meant to him. But language stood between them like a wall. Instead, he placed his hand over his chest and bowed his head slightly. It was not part of their custom, but they understood the feeling behind it. The elder responded by touching the ground, then the trees, then pointing toward the path ahead. The meaning was clear. The forest had protected him, but now it was time for him to return to his own world. They began walking. The path they followed was narrow and nearly invisible to anyone unfamiliar with the forest. It curved around trees, crossed shallow streams, and avoided open spaces. The tribe moved silently, guiding him, watching for danger. The rancher focused on each step, using the walking stick to keep his balance. Though tired, he felt strong enough to continue. As they moved farther, he noticed the forest slowly changing. The trees became less dense. Light grew brighter. The ground felt different beneath his boots. These signs told him they were nearing the edge of the hidden territory. At one point they stopped. The elder knelt and drew shapes in the dirt again, a line leading forward, a circle behind, a clear message. From this point on, the rancher would walk alone. Beyond this place, the tribe would not follow. The moment felt heavy. The rancher turned to face them all. He studied their faces one last time, trying to remember every detail. These people had saved him when no one else could. They had asked for nothing in return. He knew he would likely never see them again. He nodded once deeply. The elder placed the walking stick firmly into his hand, closing the rancher's fingers around it. Then, without ceremony, they stepped back. One by one, they turned and disappeared into the trees, blending so completely into the forest that it felt as if they had never been there at all. The rancher stood alone. For a long moment, he did not move. The silence pressed against him, different from the silence of the tribe's home. This silence felt open, uncertain. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. The journey back was slow and exhausting. He followed the path they had shown him, stopping often to rest. His leg protested with each step, but he pushed forward, knowing he had no choice. The forest was no longer guiding him. He was on his own again. As hours passed, familiar signs appeared. Broken branches that looked man-made, faint tracks. Sounds that did not belong to deep wilderness. The distant echo of something mechanical. Each sign reminded him that he was returning to a world that had already accepted his loss. Near the end of the day, he reached the edge of the forest. Before him stretched open land, hills, sky, space. The sight made his chest tighten. He had missed this openness, but now it felt strange, almost too exposed. He turned once, looking back at the forest wall. From the outside it looked ordinary. Nothing suggested what lay within. He stepped forward. The next morning he was found. A local man walking near the outskirts of a settlement saw someone moving slowly along the dirt road. Thin, worn, leaning heavily on a stick. At first, the man thought it was a traveler in trouble. When he got closer, recognition struck him like a shock. The rancher, the man who had fallen from the cliff. The man everyone believed was gone. Word spread quickly. People gathered. Some stared in silence. Others spoke excitedly. The rancher was helped into town, given water, clean clothes, and medical attention. Doctors examined his injuries and were confused by what they saw. Bones that should have taken much longer to heal showed signs of careful treatment. Scars were clean, not damaged. When asked where he had been, the rancher told the truth. He spoke of the fall, the forest, the people who saved him. The room fell quiet. Some listened with interest. Others exchanged doubtful looks. Officials suggested that his memories might have been affected by trauma. They explained the healing as luck, natural recovery, or confusion. No one wanted to accept the idea of a hidden tribe living unseen. The rancher did not argue. He knew what he had experienced. He did not need belief from others to make it real. After weeks of recovery, he returned to his ranch. Life slowly resumed its old rhythm, but he was not the same man who had left. He avoided the highlands. He chose safer paths. He listened more closely to the land. Sometimes at dawn or dusk, he would look toward the distant forest line. He never tried to return. He respected the boundary that had been drawn for him, but he carried something with him always. A quiet understanding that beyond maps and fences, beyond roads and rules, there were still places where people lived differently. Places where kindness did not need explanation, and survival depended on harmony rather than force. He had crossed into such a place once, by accident. And though he had returned, a part of him would always remain in the forest, walking silently among those who saved his life and asked nothing in return. Life slowly returned to what others called normal, but for the rancher, nothing truly felt the same again. Each morning he woke before sunrise, just as he always had, Yet the silence felt different now. The open land around his ranch seemed louder than before, filled with sounds he once ignored. The wind across the fields no longer felt empty. It reminded him of the forest, of quiet movements and unseen watchers. His body healed in time. The pain faded, leaving behind scars that told a story no one else could fully understand. Doctors called his recovery unusual but possible. Friends called him lucky. Some avoided the topic of where he had been altogether, as if speaking about it made them uncomfortable. Others asked questions out of curiosity, not belief. The rancher stopped explaining after a while. He realized that some experiences were not meant to be proven. They were meant to be carried. He returned to his work, but he worked differently now. He moved more slowly, paid closer attention to the ground beneath his feet and the sky above him. He no longer pushed himself or his animals beyond safe limits. Where he once tried to control the land, he now worked with it. Neighbors noticed the change. He spoke less, but when he did, his words carried weight. He offered advice without judgment and listened without interrupting. Younger ranchers sometimes came to him, sensing his calm presence, even if they did not understand its source. At night, sleep did not always come easily. Sometimes he dreamed of the forest, not as it was at the end, but as it felt when he first woke there, the filtered light, the smell of leaves and earth, the quiet presence of people who spoke without words. In those dreams, there was no fear, only balance. He never saw their faces clearly in his dreams, but he always recognized them. On quiet evenings, he would sit outside his home and stare toward the distant tree line. From where he sat, the forest looked no different than any other stretch of land. No signs, no markings, no reason to believe it held secrets, and yet he knew. He never tried to find the path again, not once. He understood that his survival had been allowed, not claimed. The forest had returned him to his world, and that gift came with responsibility, respect. Years passed. Stories about his disappearance slowly faded into local history. New events replaced old mysteries. People moved on, as people always do. But sometimes, during long conversations by firelight, someone would mention the rancher who fell from a cliff and came back alive weeks later. Some would laugh it off. Others would listen quietly. The rancher never joined those conversations. Instead, he lived his life with small, meaningful changes. He helped when help was needed. He avoided waste. He showed care for animals and land alike. He planted trees where the soil had been damaged and left places untouched where nature needed space. People thought he had become thoughtful with age. Only he knew the truth. One winter, a violent storm swept through the region. Flooding damaged roads, and several travelers were stranded near the edge of the forest. The rancher was among those who went out to help. He guided people to safety, sharing water and shelter, never asking questions. As he worked, he felt something familiar, a sense of being watched, not with threat but with awareness. When the storm passed and everyone was safe, he stood alone for a moment near the forest edge. The trees stood still, their branches heavy with rain. The rancher nodded once quietly toward the trees. There was no response, but he felt peace. As age slowly caught up with him, his work became lighter. He passed parts of the ranch to younger hands, offering guidance when asked. He spent more time walking, observing, remembering. Sometimes children asked him about the scars on his leg. He would smile gently and say, "I fell once, and I was lucky." That was all. In his final years, the rancher wrote very little, but he kept a small notebook. Inside, there were no names or maps, only observations, notes about plants, about listening before acting, about how survival was not about strength alone, but about knowing when to accept help. No one understood the meaning of those notes until much later. When the rancher passed peacefully one quiet morning, the land felt strangely still. The sky was clear. The wind was gentle. People gathered to honor him, speaking of his kindness, his steadiness, his quiet wisdom. Some mentioned the old story again, the cliff, the forest, the time he disappeared, but even then no one truly understood. After his passing, the ranch was cared for with the same respect he had shown. The land remained healthy. The trees he planted grew tall. The paths he avoided stayed wild. And deep within the forest, far beyond roads and records, life continued as it always had. Unseen, balanced, protected. If the forest remembered the rancher, it gave no sign. But perhaps remembrance did not need signs. Perhaps it lived in the way he had changed, and in the quiet respect he carried for the rest of his life. His story was never meant to be proven or believed by everyone. It was meant to remind those who listened closely that the world still holds places beyond control and people beyond expectation. Places where compassion exists without explanation. Places that save lives quietly and then disappear back into the trees.